In Critical Race Theory, an Introduction by Richard Delgado and Jean Stefancic, the authors outline both the analytical lens of CRT and its real-world implications, including policy reforms aimed at addressing structural and systemic racism. What Delgado argues in Critical Race Theory, an Introduction. CRT doesn't just call for equal treatment under the law. It calls for transformational change in policies, systems, and power structures. Number one, laws and policies must be evaluated by their impact, not just intent. Delgado argues that the legal system often ignores systemic outcomes and focuses only on whether there was discriminatory intent. CRT shifts the focus to impact. How laws and practices disproportionately harm people of color, even if they seem neutral. Policy implication. Laws should be restructured or repealed if they result in disparate racial harm, even if they appear colorblind. Number two, race-neutral, colorblind policies are not enough. Delgado critiqued the myth of colorblindness, arguing it erases the history and lived experiences of people of color. He points out that colorblind policies often maintain existing racial hierarchies by ignoring historical disadvantage. Policy implication. CRT supports race-conscious reforms like affirmative action, reparations, targeted investment in historically Black communities, equity-based public education funding. Number three, challenge to traditional legal remedies. CRT scholars believe traditional civil rights remedies like anti-discrimination lawsuits are too slow, limited, and reactive. Delgado critiques how the legal system requires the burden of proof to fall on victims of racism. Policy implication. Proposes proactive structural remedies such as automatic racial impact audits on laws and budgets, shifting the burden of proof to institutions when discrimination is alleged. Institutional equity reviews similar to environmental impact assessments. Number four, support for storytelling and counter-narratives. Delgado emphasizes that lived experiences of marginalized people are crucial to understanding how racism operates. He argues that law and policy must include voices of the oppressed, not just legal precedent. Policy implication. Involve directly impacted communities in policy formation. Fund and prioritize community-driven solutions over top-down reforms. Reject one-size-fits-all legislation in favor of contextualized, localized policies. Number five, interest convergence theory. Delgado builds on Derek Bell's idea that progress for people of color only happens when it aligns with white interests. He urges policy advocates to understand power dynamics. Examples of CRT-aligned policy reforms from CRT framework. Area of education. CRT-backed policy ideas, inequitable school funding, anti-tracking policies, culturally relevant curricula. Area of housing, dated-backed policy ideas, mono-behavior for redlining, community land trusts, eviction protections. Areas of policing and justice, CRT-backed policy ideas, NEPC don't alternatives, racial impact statements, jury reform. Employment, affirmative action, wage transparency, targeted job training programs. Area of healthcare, CRT-backed policy ideas, expandable-based funding, expanded access for historically underserved populations. Area of legislation overall. CRT-backed policy ideas. Expandable equity audits before passing any major policy. Delgado doesn't just diagnose racism, he calls for systemic surgery. CRT, as explained by Delgado, pushes for bold, race-conscious policy reforms that confront power, history, and impact, not just surface-level fairness. It doesn't ask the system to be nicer, it asks the system to rebuild itself with justice at the center. Richard Delgado does not argue for white-only or black-only spaces in the sense of racial segregation or exclusion. That's a common distortion or bad faith reading of what critical race theory, CIT, scholars like Delgado actually explore. You'll hear people like Charlie Kirk, Louder with Crowder, and other radical, lying conservatives repeat that exclusion lie. In critical race theory, Delgado discusses the value of affinity spaces, or safe spaces, where people of color can speak freely about racism, oppression, and identity without white surveillance, interruption, or invalidation. In many integrated spaces, conversations about racism are often dominated by white discomfort or derailed by white fragility or defensiveness. People of color often feel the need to code switch, hold back, or educate others instead of expressing themselves freely. Creating temporary, voluntary spaces for marginalized groups allows for honest truth-telling, healing from trauma, strategy building for activism and justice. These spaces are often used in activist, educational, and therapeutic settings. Do they also support cross-racial dialogue? Yes, Delgado is clear that cross-racial dialogue is necessary for progress, but he believes it needs to happen